How interested are you in hearing Mamdani respond to New York cop podcast interview him? What happened when we tried to interview Zohran Mamdani? See for yourself. What the fuck is this? New York's finest, retired and unfiltered podcast? This has got to be shit, and this is AI.
Got a good interview for you. That right? So we're bringing on Zohran.
About 25% less at each.
Please let me know when it gets vacant.
So I charged much less than what I could get at the going rate, and I haven't.
They actually got Mamdani on, though. It's crazy how available he makes himself.
Raised the rent on my tenants in 2 years. I am
my tenants. I mean, this could be interesting. This is like clearly adversarial. Okay, we'll take a look. Okay.
That right? So we're bringing on Zohran Mamdani. Obviously, most of our friends and listeners have Republican views, many independent, many conservative views that are in favor of this podcast.
The people in the comments seem to be mostly praising the conversation. That's interesting.
But with that being said, I always say opposition meets opportunity. Communication breaks barriers. We should speak to all walks of life and find out where the root causes.
Now further.
Correct.
It's a pleasure to have you, member of the State Assembly. Thank you so much for coming on, taking time. I know you got a busy schedule. So let's just get right into it. If you could tell us where you grew up, how you grew up, and how you...
It costs more money for the MTA spending on consulting than they did on construction. I mean, that's ridiculous. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Andrew Cuomo hollowed out the MTA's internal capacity a few years prior so that they didn't have anyone who knew how to do any of these big things anymore. They had to go to McKinsey. They had to go to so many of these so-called specialists in understanding just the nuts and bolts of what it means to do mass transit. The other point is, Eric, to your question, about just how much wealth we have in this city. I believe we need to tax the wealthiest New Yorkers to fund the services that will transform every New Yorker's life. And I've been very clear. We've talked about freezing the rent, making buses fast and free, delivering universal childcare.
Becoming like a feudal enterprise for myself. So, how does your plan affect somebody like me? Are you saying I can never raise the rent? Because I'll literally at some point it'll be where I already am, but it'll get to the point where it'll be unaffordable for me to even own.
Well, do you own one of the properties that was constructed before 1970 something? Like, are you even in the group of properties that would be frozen?
So I completely understand where you're coming from, because the clients that I worked with when I was a foreclosure prevention housing counselor, many of these clients were, union guys who owned a 2-family house, rented out one unit to pay for the mortgage of the entire home. And it was so critical for them to be able to make ends meet. But what I'm speaking about with freezing the rent is specifically about rent stabilized housing.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you're not a rent stabilized rent. So this is specific to that, which is about half of all tenants who live in a specific category of units. I think overall we're talking about close to 2.5 million. The reason that I'm saying this is because I can actually deliver on it. I can't freeze the rent for market rate units, because that is ultimately a decision that's much more in the relationship between the landlord and the tenant. There are guidelines as to what's justifiable, things of that nature. With rent stabilized housing, the city has this board called the Rent Guidelines Board, has 9 members. The mayor appoints each member. And a lot of politicians...
I want to see what happens when they run into a question where Mamdani essentially just has to say, no, you need to benefit less so another group can benefit more. Because in this case, it was sidestepped by the rent freeze is only applying to certain units. But I wonder if his unit had been one of the selected rent frozen ones, or if Mamdani was advocating for rent freezing across the board, which he can't really do. But you know what I mean? I wonder how he would resolve that.
Texas and Tennessee. If you tax them further, they will flee faster. And that's one of our concerns is, how do you incentivize these big corporations to stay in New York?
He tells them at the end he wouldn't hire their anti-vax cop friend. Ooh, hold on.
City.
I struggle on this in that I think it is, on the one hand, can absolutely understand the frustration of someone who has lost their job in a time when the city is...
I clicked on a good part.
...tearing apart so much of the same policies that were made at the height of COVID, and has arbitrarily decided which ones to keep and which ones to take. I mean, I'm right now in the state legislature pushing back against the governor's attempt to ban masks, which would sound ridiculous if I told you that a few years ago when it was illegal to not wear a mask. And to have all of this at the same time, I understand where that frustration comes from. On the other hand, I also do deeply feel the importance of following public health mandates in a pandemic emergency, especially when you're a public worker. So I think ultimately, if you ask me today, would I be hiring Marlon back? I think I would fall on the side of no, because of the concerns around the necessity of upholding.
Huge stones, dude. Huge stones. I feel like the pressure here, especially with how crazy people get on anti-vax stuff, I feel like the pressure here would have been like, he would have said like he would have to leave it. Like he could have easily said, I'd have to consider it, or I have to speak with him, or I'd have to reflect on the specifics of the case or whatever, but he didn't. Crazy stuff.
That public health mandate. And yet I also don't want to pretend that this is simple or straightforward, because there are so many contradictions. And I think that one of the contradictions that really stuck with me was how we had a different set of rules for workers than we did for celebrities. And I think what New Yorkers...
Oh, he's so good. This is the #1 thing that they talked about whenever people were getting banned from establishments or fired from their jobs for not getting the vaccine or whatever. And it was this. It was like, well, why do celebrities get to do what they want? Which is total bullshit. The obvious answer is celebrities get to do what they want because they're celebrities. Like, we all know why that is. But by addressing it directly, he's like acknowledging that hypocrisy, which is like cathartic to a lot of them because they feel like nobody hears them out, you know?
Want is consistency. So that's where I am today, but I understand it's not simple, it's not straightforward.
But again, this is not really a vaccine issue, in my opinion. This is a civil rights issue.
Also, by the way, remember during the height of COVID, when there were some celebrities that were throwing parties anyway, and they were like violating the law in doing so? Do you have any idea how many political points some people could have racked up by just arresting the celebrities? Like, even if they were only in the slammer for 24 hours, you know, obviously it would have been a big hubbub, but they should have been arrested for sure. We need to do some China shit. We need performative demonstrations of the fact that nobody's above the law. Now, obviously, right now, a lot of people are above the law, which is a serious problem. But if we ever want to get things back on track, we need like a across-the-board mandate where, you know, celebrities, great and all, fall in line. Like, nobody gets to do this, okay? And it would be difficult to do, but
this is a worker rights issue. This is someone that worked for 2 years prior to this mandate during a pandemic when most New Yorkers were in there, and was previously infected and had natural provable antibodies, which the CDC said were...
That's not a standard that's not something that you can put on a little report card and show to prove that you're... If you ever allowed natural immunity as a substitute for having vaccine immunity, every single fat thumb with male pattern baldness would suddenly develop natural immunity.
Were acceptable as to had the same level of protection that the vaccine did. This is more of a worker rights issue. So, you know, sitting there and
I'm sure you're very concerned about workers' rights.
saying, oh, I care about homelessness, I care about worker rights, I care about the middle class, when we see a completely totalitarian dictate come down from a government that made absolutely no sense. Because like you just said it yourself, Kyrie Irving could play basketball, but Maul and Bethel couldn't go to work 2 years later. I mean, to me, it's kind of a hypocritical stance, in my opinion. How, you know, because to me, this is not a vaccine issue at all. This is a civil rights, worker right issue.
I'm sure you're very concerned about civil rights and workers' rights.
This set, honestly, New York City back, labor rights back, probably 100 years.
Oh yeah, 100, dude. It was worse than children climbing into looms to unwind the broken mechanical parts with their bare hands while they were operating. That's true. 100 years. Jesus Christ. Anti-vaxxers, man, they are the whiniest bitches in the world. It's crazy. They're whinier than the white nationalists.
I hear you, and I understand the contradictions at the core of it. I think
Do you think we should just make it illegal to not get a vaccine unless you absolutely can't get one? Yeah, no, I believe in absolute vaccine mandates, 100%. I don't give a shit. You can be exiled from the country if you disagree. If you have a medical reason why you can't, then sure, right? Not everybody, like sometimes you're allergic to the vaccine. That can't be helped. But the religious exemptions, no. No, sorry. It is part of the social contract, okay? It didn't used to be, but then we invented vaccines. I don't care about you, to be honest.
Concern comes from the likelihood of, that we could be in a new pandemic and the necessity of following the public health guidance that we put forward in that pandemic. to the places where I absolutely hear you is the contradictions of the guidance that we've been given thus far, what we're continuing to uphold, what we're rolling back. But that's the central core, the tension that I have is, in that moment when the science has us believe that this is the most effective way to counter it, shouldn't we have public workers be the ones who are the first to showcase the necessity of taking that step?
Well, last question before you go, and I have to run. Obviously, I was coined
He's very consistent.
as the most complained cop by the under the NYPD by the Civilian Complaint Review Board. What would be your Civilian Complaint Review Board if you have one as New York City mayor?
I would have a Civilian Complaint Review Board. I would have one that has a stable amount of funding, because what we've had from year to year is a variation in what we're actually putting forward to allow it to continue its work. And I would defer to that board in the recommendations that it makes, because I think, Eric, to what you were saying earlier, there's a need for public excellence. There's a need for actually being able to take on questions of accountability and corruption. And I think one of the ways in which the public has seen that most especially with our city and the upper echelons of our police department is that
George Washington made soldiers inoculate against smallpox. I guess the thing that bothers me about it is that there's no debate. Vaccines are a medical marvel. They're objectively superior to an unvaccinated population. This isn't like an issue on which there's a debate, and I'm being heavy-handed by using the power of the state to enforce my side. It's one side is death, and the other side is life. Yeah, I think state power should be used to bring life. I'm sorry, I just don't. Like, it's no more heavy-handed to demand that everyone be vaccinated than it is to demand that everyone within the borders of the country abide by the rule to not murder one another. Both of those are impositions. The law that prevents it, or that punishes you if you kill people, that's an imposition on your freedom. I think most people would agree it's good to have it. There's no real argument here. Most laws that most people agree on are more debatable than whether or not vaccines should be. Like, we have more debates about murder than we do vaccines, legitimate debates, I should say, because of self-defense. The nuances of self-defense, or what it means to act in self-defense, or what it means to act under perceived threat, inspire constant legal debate. They always will. It's a complicated subject. Vaccines are not a complicated subject. Well, they're not a morally complicated subject. I'm sure they were very difficult to develop. It's a totally unnatural debate. Yeah, brought about by grifters who wanted to make their, Andrew Wakefield shit, who wanted to make their living off of, questioning a pillar of modern society. The polio vaccine was widely celebrated. Didn't we read a passage from a book where people all around, I think it was New York City or all around the country, were listening to their radio to hear a scientific announcement of the discovery of the polio vaccine, and when it was announced, people threw their hats in the air, like the entire country erupted in celebration because this actual plague had been beaten. We defeated it.
That you have a CCRB which puts forward recommendations and then they are just tossed aside. So that's been my view on the CCRB.
And why do you want to get rid of the deputy mayor of public safety? I saw that in your community safety.
Found it? Holy shit, you did. Read anything about April 12th, 1955, the day Salk's breakthrough was made public, and you're likely to get a lump in your throat. All across the country, Americans gathered around their radios. Shops set up loudspeakers, factories went quiet, and judges declared their courtrooms in recess. In hundreds of movie theaters, more than 50,000 doctors watched the news together. Then came the official announcement. A team led by Dr. Jonas Edward Salk had developed a safe and effective vaccine against polio. The disease's days were numbered. In the auditorium where the press conference took place, people fell into each other's arms crying. Motorists drove around honking, and thousands of people took to the streets to celebrate. One historian later wrote, "A contagion of love swept the world. People observed moments of silence, rang bells, honked horns, blew factory whistles, fired salutes, kept their traffic lights red in brief periods of tribute, took the rest of the day off, closed their schools, or convoked fervid assemblies therein, drank toasts, hugged children, attended church, smiled at strangers, forgave enemies," and so on. And then we have the polio case and death rate. Yeah, I don't know. I don't respect anti-vaxxers. I don't think there's a real debate. I think you're anti-civilization. I think you're anti-life. I don't care if you suffer, to be honest. You could always just get vaccinated. Like, there's a way out. I don't care if you think it's authoritarian. So are laws that keep you from murdering people. Like, eat shit and don't murder people. I don't think this would happen if we cured cancer. No, because unfortunately, the reactionary class has merged and developed to they have evolved to a point where disbelief in reality is the main way they construct their criticisms. I've made this point 1,000 times before, but reactionaries have always lied. That's not new, but usually, historically, they've lied along arms of existing argument, right? There were existing conversations about, say, Jim Crow, segregation, integration. They would lie along these lines, but they would do so in the context of conversations that were already happening. The idea back then of like the reactionary class in its entirety going, well, what if we just pretended that vaccines don't work and were bad actually, would have been unthinkable. It would have been the death of that political party. They would have been derided as anti-life. Can you imagine any political party surviving after making themselves the enemy of the kind of celebration that I just described? Absolutely not. But nowadays, people live too long. Not enough people see others die of polio. No one cares. Nothing's real. So just finish the video.
Plan. What was up with that? Like, what's your rationale behind that?
I think the rationale is that the most important thing for me is outcomes, that we actually deliver public safety. And a lot of what Eric Adams has created, a lot of the positions he's created, the names sound as if they're in line with what we want, but really it's just another example of patronage, just another position that he can slot somebody into that he's worked with for decades. And for me, I want to make sure every single dollar is actually delivering the outcome. And ultimately, what I would just say in that it's been a pleasure to be here and I would love to come back is that I think New Yorkers, the thing that they hate more than a politician they disagree with is one they can't trust. And what you can always count on me to say is the same thing on this show that I'll say anywhere in this city, because I think it's important if we want to move the city forward, we understand where we disagree, we find the nuance in it and actually tackle it. Because even just raising the question about Marlon, it gives a little bit more depth to what is simply sometimes put into almost like a buzzword kind of question of where do you stand on these issues, as opposed to, you know,
he's very good
remembering the New Yorkers that are at the heart of all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, you're welcome back. We'd love to have you back to speak on your Department of Community Safety, because I think it's very nuanced, and I'd love to pick your brain on that. So I know you got a couple of forums. There are some forums that are.
He's really putting himself out there. All right, it was an interesting little